Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon how you are reaching us. Welcome to the World Teleport Association's latest webinar, which is on the teleport opportunity for LEO gateways. My name is Robert Bell. I'm Executive Director of the World Teleport Association. And if you're not familiar with us, we basically exist to do two things and have done them since 1985. One of them is to advocate for the interests, the commercial interests of teleport operators, that essential part of the global communications, particularly satellite communications business, which in many cases is overshadowed by other parts of that business, including the very large satellite operators, the very large technology companies, and yet that they play a vital role in making it all work. To balance that, we also work very hard to promote excellence in operations, technology, and business practices among those teleport operators so that they can continuously improve the level of their service to customers. And among the things that we do in those areas is to publish research reports based upon interviews with all of the companies represented in our membership. Back in January, we published this report, LEO, MEO constellations and the teleport, looking at this vast potential expansion of satellite capacity from the point of view of the ground-based service provider. And here we are in November of the same year, revisiting the topic because it's been a very fast-moving and fast-changing topic for everybody in the industry. So for today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction about that report and about WTA. I'm going to share some key insights from the report with you, and then we're going to go to a panel discussion with some people who actually know this business certainly much better than I do. I would be remiss if I did not thank some organizations for making this webinar as well as our research reports possible. They are companies that we call industry leader members of ours, and they include Eutelsat, Intelsat, Kratos, Liquid Telecom, and SES, and we're very grateful for their support. Takeaways from the report, some key things. Now again, just keep in mind, this is January, so we're publishing this in January of 2020 before quite a few amazing things happened, including, of course, the COVID pandemic, which triggered so many changes. But even back then, we were looking at a very large-scale set of plans for more than 16,000 satellites. I've seen a number of 25,000, but I'm not sure how that's amassed, either in early development or actually beginning to be deployed. And along with that, whether or not the companies have said anything about it publicly, they are all on the hunt for gateway co-location opportunities around the world because they have to have them to run their networks. There are specific and really quite tough requirements to be a co-location site for a gateway to one of these networks, and we're going to be talking about that during our conversation. And there are also still, even here in November, more unknowns than there are knowns, including whether the low latency of LEO will ultimately be its most important benefit. That's certainly what the LEO constellations believe, but it remains to be proven. Whether the effective total cost of ownership of LEO and MEO bandwidth and all the things that are required to make it happen will actually be lower than GEO. This is a very interesting question which there are absolutely two sides of the argument, and we'll all find out together. Whether LEOs and MEOs will stand alone, whether they'll become a standalone service, or will be permanently integrated with GEO in a much more complex and flexible network than we have today. And finally, the degree to which the LEO operators are going to be using the existing players in the business, teleport operators and others, as their sales, marketing, and channel partners, or whether, as certainly happened in the earliest days of announcements, it was entirely a go it alone, we're going to verticalize the entire market and take care of it all ourselves. So this report finishes by basically discerning four paths for teleport operators to participate in LEO, and they're complementary rather than being conflicting. One is just being a landlord, right? Providing co-location of ground segment. Now there's a lot that goes into that, but nonetheless, it's basically the landlord business. Another one is providing technology services for that. So if you're doing the co-location, you're in a position to provide first-line troubleshooting and maintenance for all those systems. Not a big opportunity, but nonetheless something that makes the opportunity perhaps a bit more sticky. Field installation. These are regional plays in many cases, particularly if, as it appears, consumer broadband is going to be a distant goal in these markets, and they're going to be focusing on the traditional maritime, oil and gas, and other markets where LEO can deliver a decent return on investment. That creates the opportunity for teleport operators to be the regional installation and maintenance organization for constellation customers, and thereby add to their own business while supporting the constellation operators. And finally, and this is very much in the hands of the LEO constellations, the opportunity to act as channel partners, to resell that capacity, to bundle it into their solutions, and actually act as full partners, as the teleport operators have typically been in the satellite business. So that is my very brief introduction of the report. As I say, you'll find more detail in the takeaways in your handouts. But I'm now going to turn to some experts who actually can tell us a great deal more about that. And they are Martin Coughlin, who's Business Development Director at Telstra Global, which is a major operator, telco, and also a major teleport operator in down under in Australia. Scott Sprague, the Chief Commercial Officer of Isotropic Systems, but also the former Chief Commercial Officer of OneWeb, bringing his insights there. And Ronald Vonderbregen, who is currently owner of Route 206, but again, was the CEO of LeoSat, which was one of the first victims of the if you will, the slow shakeout of LEO, and just ran into too much bad luck in too short a time. So first of all, I'd like to begin by inviting each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, your companies, and also the experiences that you bring, which is relevant to this webinar. And Martin, perhaps you could start?
Sure. Well, thank you, Robert. Okay, well, my name is Martin Coughlin, or Marty, as most people know me. I've been in the industry for 35 years. Started off working at the original satellite transmission systems, or SES, for Dave Hirschberg. Hope Dave is out there, so I'll say hello to Dave. And I built ground stations for probably the first 20 plus years, so I know a little bit about antennas, a little bit about facilities. Last 8 years, I've been the head of satellite business development here in the Americas for Telstra. And as you say, Telstra is a large telco, large teleport operator in Australia. We operate teleports in Sydney, Perth, and in Hong Kong. Just one point about Telstra, it's an interesting story because it's a telco that actually held on to its satellite capability, and that satellite capability continues to kind of morph and grow in the present day, which I think will be relevant to this conversation. So of course, back in the day, we would have used our satellite capability probably for our voice and maybe some video services. And in the recent years, we've now become more of a co-location type of provider, bringing all of the major service providers in. And we find now that the LEO MEO fleets are going to be very interesting opportunities for us. So that's pretty much where we see the business, and we're very excited to take part on this panel.
Thank you, Robert. Scott Sprague, I appreciate you guys having me here. As Robert mentioned, currently work at Isotropic Systems, where we're developing some consumer terminals, well, end user terminals, if you will, not just for the consumer market, but also for enterprise and government markets. But my background is I was started out in the satellite industry at New Skies. Actually, Ronald and I worked together there at New Skies and SES. Worked there out of The Hague for about 11 years on the commercial side of the business. So in the global sales organization, working with customers all over the world. Moved to Hong Kong and worked at ABS for a few years, and actually spent some time down in Australia working for NewSat on the Jabiru project and some other opportunities they had down there, and then moved back to the States and went to work for OneWeb. So I was with OneWeb in the early days. Certainly spent time there. I was focused again on the commercial side of the business, but spent a great deal of time talking with our gateway infrastructure team on the strategy behind the selection of sites, the challenges in regards to regulatory issues, as well as what the customer's expectations were. So hopefully I can share some of that background with everybody today. and look forward to talking with everybody on the panel, as well as fielding any questions from the folks around the call today.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. And finally, Ronald Vonderbregen, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And again, thank you for having me on. Wonderful opportunity to hear what's going on and to ask some, answer some questions of the audience out there. I've had a start in my career with a telecom operator, so come from that side of the business, and joined New Skies, as Scott mentioned before. Had the opportunity to also be in the US and lived and worked there for a couple of years, and then later moved on to LeoSat. And as Randall mentioned, we ran into some bad luck in too little time, or I don't know exactly how you phrased that, but it gave me a chuckle. It was indeed quite a ride, and given that we had so much customer traction, it was also, particularly working on the commercial side, as I was responsible for the commercial operations, a very bitter pill to swallow, so to speak. That being said, it got me around and got me in front of lots of customers and around the world, and gave me an opportunity to appreciate, some of the applications that the customers are looking for LEO to address and fix and make better relative to geo infrastructure. And it also gave me an opportunity to work with a lot of teleport operators and have discussions around, okay, so what are the requirements of the future, and how do you prepare for being successful in this new time where LEO will be dominating the field. So it is after that I went back, so to speak, to my own company, the one that I had set up prior to joining LeoSat. But being back, I have the opportunity to now work with customers predominantly here in Europe, and now one particular one in Scandinavia that I'm working with, an area where I think we're going to be talking about later, because it's a good area for LEO, and helping them figure out how to best position themselves and what technology to develop, again in the light of all the upcoming constellations that we will no doubt see being launched in the next 3 to 5 years. And again, I'm happy to share all that knowledge and information with the audience here, based on some of the questions that we'll be talking about.
Well, that's great, Ronald. Thank you. And yes, I'm glad you appreciated my phrase, right? There's plans, and then there's luck, good and bad, and sometimes if the bad luck piles up too fast, best laid plans. So
well, I typically say that we ran out of runway before we had liftoff. That's
it's exactly
a metaphor that people kind of understand that we'll bring bad things, but I like yours too.
Okay. Well, earlier this year, WTA did publish this report that I've shown, and I think its primary purpose was to signal the importance of the gateway business, but also the fairly stringent facility and technology requirements for supporting a gateway. So I want to just start this by laying out what those technology requirements are, but also what the business drivers are behind them. And Martin, I think I want to turn to you for that, because you're in the position of having to respond to these RFPs and RFIs coming your way.
Sure, and you're correct. We do talk to a lot of the new fleet operators. So from our perspective, there's a lot of satellites that are going to be going up. I mean, a lot of satellites, and they are basically coming to us with the requirements in all different shapes and sizes. So some of the ground topologies are large antennas and a few teleports or gateway locations. Some of them are small antennas with many, many locations. And Australia is a big place. So, everybody pretty much in the whole satellite industry has some kind of connection to Australia. It's a great place to set up if you're going to be doing US DoD business and things of this sort. And it's also a stable location in Asia. So Australia is always in the plan somewhere. And even though Telstra, being a telco, has a huge amount of property, we have exchange buildings. I think I've counted over 5,000 of them. We have established teleports. So we can pretty much handle any requirement, but you would be surprised. Some of the requirements are very large pieces of land. So I would say to the teleport operators, unless you have, for some of these operators, many, many acres, could be in the, 8 to 10 to 15 acre available land, it may be difficult to support them. And with some of the others, they merely don't want to be in one place. They need to be in 5 places or 10 places. And we're getting requirements in Australia maybe for 20 locations. And again, we have exchange buildings, but there's other, mitigating factors that not every exchange building can have available land, available power. So again, it gets difficult. The one thing I'll bring up that seems to be missing in everyone's business plan, it kind of comes back to your comment about total cost of ownership, is the connectivity piece. And now working in a telco for 8 years, a lot of people, we're all satellite guys, so we have guys that understand the launch business well, how much per kilogram into orbit. We have guys who understand how to make small satellites, guys that understand how to make great antenna technology. But where I see a lot of it being missed is the connectivity piece, because the guys who think, I'll take, for example, need distributed sites all over the place, such as in the middle of the Pacific or in the continent of Australia, continent of Asia. A lot of these are very high throughput, so you need multiple gigabits of capacity brought out to all these locations. And a lot of the operators are under the impression Australia is wired like the US is, so we can simply set up in any location that we need and put in, 5 gig connections, 10 gig connections. Some of them are even talking about 100 gig connections. And these connections don't exist. And if you want to build them out, they're going to be very expensive. So just bear in mind, every satellite in space has to have an antenna on the ground that has to have some large pipe connected to it, and all that has to be calculated into the business model. So again, being in a telco and being in a company with teleport operations and a lot of options for connectivity across Australia, we're still struggling to be sure we can provide the connectivity and do it at a reasonable price. We obviously, with time and money, you can do anything, but to still keep within what is going to be the expected cost of ownership for these, new fleet operators to make a return. So that's a bit of insight from a telco, a large telco with lots of property and lots of options for these new fleet operators. Don't forget the connectivity part.
Okay, so we're talking about power, uninterruptible, and generators, and we're talking about the ability to have a big view of the sky, particularly if you're busy tracking fast-moving objects, high connectivity, and of course tons and tons of redundancy. My comment would be, even in the U.S., there's just tons and tons and tons of places where you don't have that kind of availability, but certainly I know that Australia struggled with it. Ronald and Scott, could you just, let's spend a minute having you take us inside the minds of LEO operators who are on the hunt for gateway locations. So aside from fulfilling these sort of facility and technology requirements, being in the right location, and being advised perhaps that the connectivity on the ground is not what they might expect, what value adds make a teleport operation especially desirable as a gateway? And I don't know, perhaps Scott, why don't you start?
First I would certainly second what Martin just said in regards to connectivity. It was one of the things I had on my list. There was an interesting webinar on the SES website that they did on the Empower network, and they're talking, that the Empower MEO satellites will have the capability to put 10 gig down to a single location. Now, you think about what that means to a gateway location. It's pretty significant. I know that when we sat at OneWeb and looked through the kind of the gateway roadmap and the plan, things like security in regards to teleport operators, the confidence in the power grid, uptime, the ability to expand, right? They, in a lot of cases, especially when you're looking at your business plan and you're going to roll out your capital, you're probably not going to blow through everything on the front ends, but you want to understand that as your business grows, you can add more, infrastructure to the gateway locations, and I think that's important. I also think, the regulatory approvals and any interference mitigation is important in regards to, where these gateways are located and how they're set up. I'm sure Ronald's got a lot more details than that because, his experience is a lot fresher than mine.
Sure, and happy to talk about that. Again, like I mentioned in the intro, I think when LEOs are coming into main play, what you'll see is that change of orbits now being polar. There'll be a focus on some of the high north and low south areas, simply because that's where these satellites congregate. So not necessarily for data and for services, but for TT&C purposes, it is great to be in Scandinavia at this point. And it's not for nothing that on the island of Svalbard, which I think is around 80 degrees north, OneWeb has put a lot of antennas for that very reason. So location matters. Secondly, I think scalability is going to be a big thing. So, and I mean it in two ways. LEO is a data business. So customers that you pick up start small and grow big. So the ability to, as a gateway operator, offer these operators the service that you can start small, and as their customer base grows, they can continue to grow with you, as opposed to having to start big and build the first generation of antennas already fit to capture the entire capacity of the satellites that are overflying is something that's going to be too expensive. So scalability in that sense is important. From a hardware perspective, it's also important to be scalable in the sense that if you are a geo teleport and you're looking at 6 satellites, and now you need 6 antennas and maybe 1 or 2 spares. But if you want to look at 2 or 3, LEOs, then now you're looking at dozens and dozens of satellites with multiple beams. So this whole parabolic antenna thing is starting to, show its weaknesses in terms of being scalable. So this is where phased arrays come in, where arguably you can, concentrate 6, 8, 12 beams in one antenna, which will make for a much easier setup. So scalability is going to be the thing of the future. Flexibility, of course, is important too. Are you in a location where indeed you have the capacity and the network and the means to hand off all that traffic to the terrestrial network? It's going to be super important. I think also from an antenna perspective, gateway operators will be interested in total cost of ownership models, whereby you're not just buying the antenna up front, but you're kind of leasing it for a 12-year period, ideally from the vendor, so that you can have I think as an antenna manufacturer, you can really how shall I say, position yourself favorably relative to the competition in that way. But lastly, and arguably most importantly, LEOs are like mobile networks. They will come in generations. And so now we're seeing the first generation, mainly bent pipe type architectures. And over time, you'll see that become more and more interconnected and running like a terrestrial network in space type constellation. And as that is evolving, what you'll see is that the business from gateway operators will go from what you put in your presentation earlier, from a landlord type model to being the manager of a network of many nodes. Because as you are going into these third generations of LEOs, where it's operated as a data network, you'll be managing rooftops of big corporates and headquarters of enterprises and government agencies, as if they were antennas on your own, as a landlord on your own territory, so to speak. So as you're building your business to cater for LEO, what you'll see is you'll become more of a network/node operator with various locations that go well beyond the piece of land that you currently, have 100% of your focus on. So I think these are the things that you need to take into account as you start planning for the future when it comes to LEO.
Well, thank you for that. That's actually a point that I've not heard before, that we're all used to the refresh cycle of Geo, which is practically a human lifetime. But the generational advances available in Leo are going to be entirely of a different character. That's a very interesting point. The near-death experience of OneWeb illustrates one of the points that was made in our report, actually, which is that gateway growth comes with risk. You're going to put effort, time, perhaps money into becoming a gateway operator, and your customer may just go away. How, in terms of designing the business relationship, how can operators mitigate that risk? Marty, maybe you chime in on that.
Well, very good topic. We kind of know about OneWeb's OneWeb's problems. So a couple things here. So again, as I mentioned in my model, Telstra has a lot of property. So you could almost argue in a way we're just monetizing property we already own in a different fashion. So that's probably a good thing that Telstra is able to do. But obviously, once you start putting cement in the ground, that costs time and money. I think it's more about what Ron mentioned about scalability, that you want to kind of scale and not go too big too quick, because if the business models don't work, that's going to be a problem. So I think that's a very important key. I mean, if you are going to say work with a particular fleet operator in a particular country, there may be a case where a fleet operator picks a partner. That partner maybe says, well, you can use my existing teleport, we'll acquire some other property. Then it comes down, are you buying property, are you leasing property, what kind of terms are you getting? And then it comes back to the connectivity. Are you going to pay to have these large circuits brought to these locations, or can you scale up in a better fashion? So I guess, to be somewhat risk adverse, you want to scale as the business scales, as the revenue scales, and probably that's the discussion you need to have with your, fleet operator who you're talking to on how to best mitigate, financial risk into the future with the particular fleet or business model that they have.
Right, and that goes back to the heart of what Ronald just shared with us. Got a couple of questions from our audience I want to bring in, so I think they're relevant to this part of the discussion. Going back, since I've got you on talking, Marty, one of our listeners has asked if there is a pertinent technology, connectivity technology, that needs to be optimized. In other words, is it a case to optimize the RF, or to use data integration to manage the connectivity? This is a very deep technical question. Did you understand what's being asked?
Is the connectivity from an RF standpoint with the satellites? That may be better handled by Scott. If it's a terrestrial connectivity piece, I should have brought some of my solution architects onto the call, because that's another important part. As I mentioned, usually satellite companies have great satellite people and one or two, connectivity or terrestrial people, and not to say they don't do a great job, but Telstra has hundreds of telco engineers, obviously, and it's still challenging for us. So I don't know, from a connectivity perspective on the terrestrial side.
Just to clarify, as I'm rereading the question, I think what this listener is really talking about is that interface between the RF and the data pipe.
Right. I am not really that up so much on that.
Okay.
I know about some of the Kratos technology, which I find very interesting. I may pass that off to one of the other panelists, maybe Scott.
Anybody else have something they could share on that, or do we have to just shrug and say above our pay grade?
Yeah, above my technical pay grade, I can tell you that. At least from getting into the interface between the satellite RF and the terrestrial infrastructure. As Ronald knows, that one's above my technical pay grade. Oh.
Yeah, I'll just go back in. I mean, typically, from what I see, a lot of the new fleet operators are going to, companies like Hughes, maybe companies like Viasat, companies that, Newtek/ST Technologies, now iDirect. I mean, those are all the guys that Kratos, that are really the leaders in the modem kind of, connectivity part, I think. I mean, a couple companies are maybe home growing a solution. I don't know of any specific technology. It's almost like you're trying to, well, I wouldn't call it transmodulate, but you want to move from bits from a terrestrial environment directly into an RF. Great place to be doing some research for sure. Definitely an important piece of all these networks we're talking about. I wouldn't know what direction, other than to go to one of the big leaders in the industry.
Well, and it's part of one of the generalized trends, which is to try to turn RF into data at the earliest possible point, so that from there on everything gets cheaper. Just a second question here. Let's see how we do on this one. You're being asked to describe a typical, in quotes, LEO gateway architecture. In other words, what are all the bits and bobs that go into that, and do you foresee it being a multi-vendor open RFP, or a single vendor turnkey saying, here's the whole solution? And this is really, sort of for the teleport operator who's going to be building this thing out.
Well, just quickly from a Telstra standpoint, we obviously, try to get as much business as we can. So we try to say the great job we're going to do. One other point, which I think maybe we'll talk about later, is about channel. So obviously Telstra has a very large consumer base. So if a particular operator is doing more of a B2B model, then certainly Telstra has a lot to see in consumers and users. So Telstra is probably a good choice. If you or any large telco or any large company, not just us, to use companies that have that channel, if that's what you're looking to do. And then I think either Scott or Ron mentioned, as close as you can get to either a rooftop or cloud entry point or data center, then you minimize, those other costs. And these are probably future generational type fleets maybe. But yeah, I mean, we're happy, and I'm sure all the other teleport operators, to come up with solutions where, one throat to choke kind of model.
Exactly. Let's just pass on for a moment. Ronald had mentioned the phased array, flat panel, whatever the technology is going to be called, solution on a gateway basis. But of course, the success of these constellations and gateways hinges on another bit of technology, which is the end user antenna, the customer antenna. Real briefly, Scott, because we don't have a lot of time here, but how would you characterize the state of development of those platforms, and how should teleport operators think about the potential, the risk of the deployment of LEO foundering on the lack of good antennas at the customer's end?
Yeah, I mean, again, Robert, thanks for the question. I think the antenna market overall is had some great developments over the past few years. And that's both in parabolics and flat panels. There's some interesting things that are going on. You've seen some of the parabolic antenna manufacturers come out with, multi-band antennas. On the flat panel side, you've got some really interesting advancements across the different vertical markets. Certainly ThinCom's done some interesting stuff on the aero side. Chimeta on the sort of land mobility side at the lower end of the market. And Isotropic Systems, we're in the development process. We've rolled out our first generation of a multi-beam antenna in Ka band that can connect to both LEO, GEO, and MEO simultaneously. So I think based on the developments on the customer side of the antenna market, I think they're going to unlock some of the capabilities of the LEO network. They're going to make them more cost effective. And, if the LEO network is designed correctly, right, that it hits the correct, design for the markets they're targeted. And I think that's one of the problems OneWeb had on the front end. And I'll, go back to LeoSat on the other side, is I think their design and then their target of what the design was for, it was very spot on. And then do you have the customer antennas on the other side that can unlock the capabilities of that network? And I think those things are starting to happen, because we're starting to see more things around open standards, interoperability, software-defined networks. And I think as those move forward, they're going to improve the overall business case, which will make the business case for the teleport operators much stronger. So the value chain will get stronger because of it.
Okay, so you think it's going to arrive in time, which is good news for everybody. we have a member of our board at WTA who is in the business of finding and building out gateway locations, and he has an interesting description of a teleport, which is not one that I think most teleport operators would sign on to. And the description is it's high-class real estate. It has all the amenities that the constellation operators need, but basically it's in the right place, as though it were a retail store. So that immediately makes me wonder, and this is, I guess, we'll see if all of you have an answer to this. From the teleport operator's point of view, just how good is this gateway business that we're all talking about chasing and hopefully winning? What are the upsides and downsides compared to other lines of business? Marty, I'm going to start with you because it's a question for the operator.
Sure. Yeah, and it's funny. I read your question when you sent them around previous, and it's exactly what I've been saying with we've been discussing with some of our sales and technical people. We're just in the real estate development business. I mean, that's exactly what we're doing. You don't need really to know anything about satellite technology. If you're designing new LEO ground stations, it's just like we're saying, can you get the right land in the right place? Does it have the right connectivity close to a large pipe or close to a cloud entry point or a data center? So we're really migrating from having that one teleport with dual generation and big UPSs and everything, now to finding, in the case where they want new ground stations because of their feeder beams or how their architecture is set up, really finding high-class real estate. So we're really in the real estate development market, just being sure we have all the right pieces at that location. We don't need waterfront property or a central business district property, but typically we need quiet RF areas, and we need, like I said, big pipes and other things. So it's a very interesting concept, what you mentioned about.
But I mean, real estate is traditionally a pretty good business in terms of its returns. So I mean, just as you think about it compared to some of the other data businesses, is it? I'm going to guess, since you're very interested in it, that it's a desirable business. How about that?
Yeah, well, like I said, we are fortunate because we own so much property that we can essentially monetize our property. I use the term found money a lot, but essentially, if you have a old decrepit exchange building that happens to have a few acres of property around it and some connectivity that could be upgraded, well, guess what? You may have a great teleport potential that you didn't know about. So I think it is a good business, and like I said, even teleport operators that maybe just have a traditional single teleport, they may consider, with the proper partnership with a new fleet operator, to go and develop more, because obviously the teleport business or know-how or tribal knowledge sits with teleport operators. So if I were a fleet operator, rather than just trying to hire a lot of guys to maybe develop my own, I would go to a teleport operator and use their expertise to guide me on how to develop. So I think it's a good business, for the teleport operator.
Well, and that is happening all around the world. Here's a question from one of our listeners. It's an interesting one for everybody. Does anybody on the panel feel that an independent teleport operator, which could be a telco, but is more likely to be a company with a small number of locations, can that company hope to support more than one LEO ground, one LEO operator? Or are you going to have to sort of sign on with one, and that's your team?
Scott, my take would be they absolutely could do more than one. I certainly worked with a lot of independent teleport operators at my time at New Skies and SCS that had very unique positions in certain vertical markets and great real estate, and great locations. And so I definitely think, again, if you look, Telesat announced today that they just signed a deal with the Canadian government for rural connectivity. It looks like their, LEO constellation is going to move forward. You've got some of the other LEO constellations moving forward, albeit, with Starlink and the Kuipers, you don't know what they're doing because they're so it's a closed shop at the moment. But I certainly think there's opportunities to work with more than one LEO operator. That's at least my perspective. I don't know, Ronald, what do you think?
I totally agree. I was about to say the same thing. I mean, that's how these operators work. They have no problem, landing their traffic in locations where others do as well. So there's really no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah, it's quite the opposite, right? If somebody already has a successful operation doing it, they probably makes them more attractive.
True.
Okay, so there's a big, hairy set of problems that I want to finish our discussion talking about. And this has to do with regulation, which can drive everybody mad, given the chance. So there are two regulatory trends that seem to be complicating the search for gateways. One of them is data sovereignty laws, driven by the fact that data is the latest pirate loot, and the pirates are really good at getting their hands on it. And so those data sovereignty laws, for those who aren't familiar with it, restrict where data can be stored. So that if it's a citizen of my country, I want my data to be stored in that country. And the other side of that, of course, is this vast regulatory push that's been going on for the last several years to open up satellite frequencies for mobile use. So what are the challenges that you see being created by those two trends?
Yeah, so if I can start with this, because I'd like to start at 30,000 foot here, really, because I think we need to flip this one around. I think this is not so much a challenge, it really is an opportunity. When at LeoSat, we were heavily dependent on, lots of countries with their own regulations and to adhere to them, which is what you have to do. So working with local teleport operators, distributors was key, not just for revenue purposes, but also from the ability to benefit from the knowledge they have and the inroads they have into local rules and regulations. So I would almost argue the exact opposite. The more complex it gets, the higher the value of the teleport operator to be of critical importance and a true partner to these satellite operators. Now, that doesn't say much about the actual rules and regulations themselves and how to go around them, and then sometimes it's more difficult than others. But again, as these rules and regulations get more important, the value of an operator that is well versed in the local community and knows exactly what's going around is getting more and more important as a partner for a LEO operator. So again, it's an opportunity more than anything else. Very interesting point of view. Scott, how about you?
Well, I mean, the one thing I'd add to that is a lot depends on how the LEO constellation is designed. What is the intelligence or the capabilities of the LEO network? Can it move traffic between satellites? Can it determine where the traffic is going to land, right? I mean, that was one of the challenges at OneWeb that we had, right? It was basically the first generation of satellites that they're launching are you want to just call them, dumb satellites, right? They're going to just land that traffic and it's going to go down, and it isn't going to basically be able to determine where the traffic terminates. It could terminate in a gateway, and let's just use some real life examples. It could terminate in a gateway in Pakistan when it's India. Traffic that's been originating in India, and India says you got to terminate that traffic in India. So then, how do you get around that? And that's where the terrestrial infrastructure of the gateways is important, because can you then securely backhaul the traffic back to the country of its origin, and will that suffice from a sovereignty perspective? And those were the challenges that we started to see when I was at OneWeb on the placement of the gateways, and then what challenges did they have to overcome on the ground from a regulatory perspective. Now, if you got more intelligence in the satellite network, and certainly LeoSat had that, and the Telesat network looks like it's going to have that, it may open up some opportunities to be a little bit more flexible and to work within those sovereignty laws that are out there. But it's certainly something that it'll be challenging going forward for the OneWeb network. That's for sure.
Hey, and I'd like to just make one contribution here, because I'm in the trenches with spectrum regulation, and Australia is a very interesting market. In the high density areas, population density, there's different rates for spectrum use compared to medium and lower population densities. So as it works out in Australia, all the places these operators want to be, either near data centers or near big pipes, all work out in these large population centers, which are extremely expensive to license. In fact, our teleports are in medium and large population areas now, and they're extremely expensive to license the 4 or 5 gig in the Ka band. Now, recently, Australia embargoed, as they call it, or put a moratorium on some of the frequencies in the Ka band. That's really causing havoc with many of the new fleet operators that are operating in Australia, want to operate in Australia, which is forcing them now into the more rural areas and forcing them to pay more for the connectivity piece. So I think about the challenges in Australia and its spectrum, and it boggles my mind if the regulator, people in the companies are going through this in all these different countries. So Australia has just come out with a new licensing scheme, which I won't bore your audience with, but it's a very challenging, issue, I think, for these new operators when you multiply it by every country has their own laws and how they're going to approach things. So very, very difficult topic currently to deal with.
Yeah, Scott and Ronald, do you have any, because the Australian example is the most extreme one I've heard, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. Are you seeing other examples of that?
Try China.
Well,
China. Most of the Middle East countries, the UAE, Russia, India. I mean, they all want traffic that was originated in country to terminate in country, and it is a complex and challenging problem. And again, it's the whole network design. So the gateway is a critical piece of that, the gateway infrastructure and the terrestrial connectivity of the gateway. But then it's also the intelligence that's in the satellite network. And so these new LEO constellations that are a bit more flexible, that are able to move traffic between satellites, that can relocate beams, that can reshape beams, give you a lot more flexibility to deal with those issues, so that you can drive a successful business case. That's how I see it.
So it's really just a maturing of the technology that's required. So what are you seeing in the ground segment business? What are you seeing companies do to try to deal with these issues? Scott, you already mentioned trying to create a secure pipe to move traffic that is from India in this case, or from any other nation, into that nation. Has that been a successful strategy?
I mean, in some areas that's been successful. I think OneWeb worked it out in the Middle East, where they were capable of doing that with their gateway partners. I think the other ones that are coming up, and just briefly touched on it, is that some of the new LEO and MEO constellations have the ability, if you will, there's like software-defined satellites. So they're reshaping beams, they're moving beams around, and that allows them to terminate some of their gateway beams in certain areas or do certain things with that. So I think that's the things that the gateway, the teleport operators need to look at when they're partnering up with the various satellite operators in the overall value model and the business model that they have. Are they going to be successful, and are they going to be able to overcome some of these challenges?
I mean, Marty, what you described was this interesting scenario where I get this vision of Telstra going out and basically building a small, well, it won't be small physically, but a relatively low investment teleport out in the outback somewhere, and having to run a really big data pipe back to where their nearest central office. So that's the logical solution, but I guess what the business question comes down to: who pays for it all?
Yeah, that's right, and it kind of ties back into our whole discussion about scalability and things. But yeah, that's one aspect. And if I could expand a little more, currently Australia has given a window with this licensing regime. What's really interesting, though, Telstra being a telco, the satellite group is effectively fighting the mobile group, if you want to call it that, because they're obviously the people that wouldn't let any spectrum go to anybody. Obviously, the millimeter wave backhaul, or I forget the exact application for the 27.5 to 28.3, but that particular band is co-shared. and the new licensing regime, they're going to attempt to find a way to broker, kind of a dual use. And yeah, it may mean, like you say, being out in the rural areas to get away from these, high density zones. And look, Telstra makes investment. We obviously serve a large country, so we're okay to do that. But we have to really understand the business cases, and the same for the fleet operators. They have to understand what they're getting into. I spent fair amount of time in Brazil in the past life, and that's another, huge country. And I think back, what would they be doing there? Would they be taking the same approach and building these gateways, in the middle, I'm not going to say the Amazon, but you know what I mean, way out of population areas, because you're always going to be fighting with the mobility guys. And the other challenge we're having is also with interference on the receiving end. So it's not just the transmit band that has been a problem or problematic. The receiving bands have also been used by now with terrestrial radios, and we're having to spend a lot of time doing RF studies and sending people out. We do desktop studies. So that's the other place. It doesn't seem like this KA band is so very well partitioned or regulated, or however you want to call it. Like in the case of KU, we were very lucky here in the US, and I think globally, that we really never had any terrestrial competition. I know in the old days, C-band, we used to do a lot of coordination and things, but it's a very challenging problem, and you have to be very careful. We rejected many sites for certain operators due to local terrestrial interference in the receive band. So there is a lot of challenges in all these places. You just can't simply go into sort of a nowhere area and think everything's going to be okay. You really have to be sure you know what your surroundings are going to be like. So challenging.
Let's sneak in the last couple of questions from our listeners. One has a question which I find fascinating, which is noting that the gateways for the first generations of LEOs are trying basically to use modified geo equipment, parabolics. And the question is it the view of our panelists that equipment is going to be able to stand up to the requirement of the very fast transit times that the LEO satellites will have? Or is that basically...
That is a great question, and the one that we very much have on the table, and also with the guys that I'm working with now. I think the short answer is no. The thing to keep in mind is these LEO operators, they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, and they have no problem spending it with you. So what is really important is that you develop as an operator, as a teleport operator, you develop a roadmap that touches on technology, on what you can do regulatory wise, the software and services that you have, and just a general vision as to where you want to take your teleport in order to be of value to these LEO operators. Antenna is a piece of that. It's an important piece of that, but it is a piece of that. And what I see now is that there's a lot of these operators that are taking a curious position, or maybe even skeptical. They're skeptical about what's going on. And I think it's time to realize that money is flowing around in the hundreds of millions in LEO. It will happen. I truly believe LEO will be to data what GEO will be or has been to television. And so it's time to gear up. And yesterday's technology and today's technology will not work as tomorrow's technology. So the answer is no, and that's an opportunity rather than anything else.
There's another last question which I think relates very closely to this one, and it brings us back to the issue of the flat panel antenna, and the question that this couple of related questions, but it basically comes down to will we and how long will it take for the industries, the various competitors in the industry, to produce an FPA that's got both performance and a cost that makes it, a solution that can be used in a gateway, a solution that can be used in an end user application, albeit one that's, high demand, like oil and gas, maritime, et cetera, et cetera. And related to that, what are there standards? Are standards emerging for that performance so that customers can make informed decisions about what technology they buy?
Well, I certainly take a stab at answering that question. I think there's some interesting flat panel technologies out there right now. As far as timing goes, I think you're looking at 2021, 2022 to start to get some high performance flat panel terminals out for the end users. From a cost perspective, there's going to be a range of capabilities and cost models. They've got some of the higher end use cases like government use cases for DoD and MOD, where they're going to want certain hardened multi-beam performance that'll be on the high side. But you're also looking at flat panel technologies, at least within the isotropic systems portfolio, where we'll do some creative things to be able to provide service to fixed data locations, cellular backhaul, enterprise sites, things like that, in a very cost-effective way that will provide high performance in multiple beams. The maritime side already has some pretty interesting solutions for the maritime industry, and that's very, you've really got to dig down into maritime and break it down to the different maritime vertical markets. You can't just sort of lump it together, because you got the high-end cruise, which today continue to use parabolics very well. They've got the space on the ships. They've got high requirements, and the Intellian parabolics work great. But there are some flat panel technologies that are coming out that will start to address the opportunities in the other vertical markets within maritime, albeit smaller vessels, freight, things like that, and oil and gas. And I think those are a year to 2 years away from being available. Now on the gateway side, that's a bit more of a specific market, because you need a fairly large antenna with high performance. And so Ronald alluded to it, but there are some phased array technologies out there that Ball Arrow and some others are working on that could be very applicable in the gateway space. I don't know, Ronald, maybe you want to chime in here, or Martin?
I can only confirm what you just said. Ball is looking at is having his hands on some very interesting technology, and it's being picked up by other antenna companies as the basis for enhancements that are specific to gateways. So you're right. I mean, I think there's work being done there, and this is exactly the kind of scalability that will be required for future gateways to be successful, unless they fancy doing dozens and dozens of antennas that are high maintenance and have high OpEx costs.
Interesting. Well, we have to stop ourselves there. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I really want to thank Marty Coughlin, Scott Sprague, and Ronald Vonderbregen. Coming up, we just on November 3rd published Inside the Top Operators, which is our look from data provided by the largest and fastest growing teleport operators at the end of 2019. And then we have more relevant reports coming up, teleports and the 5G opportunity, which also continues to evolve at high speed, coming out in December. And in January, we'll be looking at the virtual teleport, which, as we heard in this discussion, is part of the solution that will eventually bring us to a world of LEO, MEO, and GEO all happily coexisting. So thank you very much for attending. For WTA, this is Robert Bell, and we look forward to having you join us next time.